tensions escalate as two Armscor Corporation housing tents, American, into... I tried to ad-lib it and I failed. Okay, tensions escalate as two Armscor tents housing American and Russian workers, respectively, are attacked, and 6 men are killed. The survivors retaliate against the wrong people. I don't remember who that is. And Unoma police put the tents on a lockdown, and they're basically, like, striking. Frank visits the American tent to urge them to channel their grievances through the proper channels, and he says we should get organized rather than resorting to violence. Meanwhile, Maya and other leaders are observing, unbeknownst to Frank, via cameras that are still live, and Frank has no idea. After Frank gets out of the American tent, Maya asks Frank to accompany her as she goes to talk to the workers in the Russian tent, hoping to sway them the way that Frank did with the Americans. Very good. So Frank gives a riveting speech full of hope to the American workers who are like, we can't live like this. Our conditions are cramped, and you keep sending new immigrants, and you don't even have enough room for the ones that you have. And you guys don't even care that we're basically living in fucking, like fucking disheveled factory conditions. It's like Upton Sinclair is the jungle in here. My best friend got crushed by an Amazon delivery robot last week. And now terrorists are attacking us. I don't remember who they think is attacking them or who did. I don't remember. There's a lot of beautiful politics in this book. I don't even know how to summarize all that has happened at this point. I am willing to answer questions about it as we go if you're confused or something. Frank and Phyllis fighting over Mars is pretty entertaining. The two worst people I know are fighting each other. The only bummer is that one of them's gonna be a winner, right? Oh yeah, and so Frank is like talking to the workers in this tent after they've just been attacked and they're living in horrible conditions. And to quote, it took a while to ratchet them into an agreement. Or it took a while to ratchet them into agreement. Disarm, cooperate, organize, petition the American government for help, for justice. Put themselves in his hands, in effect. Of course it took a while. And along the way, he had to promise to address every complaint, to solve every injustice, to right every wrong. It was ridiculous, obscene, but he pursed his lips and did it. So yeah, he basically promises that he's gonna make it all better, and he thinks that they're idiots for believing him, and then he walks out of the fucking tent after successfully pacifying them, and he walks right into Maya, who's like, hey, I was watching that live on the camera. Can you teach me how to do that so I can do the same thing in the Russian tent? So now, under Frank's tutelage, Maya is going to pacify the angry Russians. Russians are used to it, she said. These tents aren't that different from Moscow apartments. Yes, yes. Russia had become a kind of immense Korea, sporting the same brutal, streamlined capitalism, perfectly tailorized, and with a veneer of democracy and consumer goods covering the junta. Junta. It's amazing how little you need to keep starving people strung along. Frank, please. Just remember that and it'll all go okay. Are you going to help or not? She demanded. Yes, yes. And that is where we left off. The central square smelt of bean curd and borscht and electrical fires. And the crowd was much more unruly and loud than in the American tent. Everyone there a defiant leader, ready to unleash a declamation. A lot more of them were women than in the American tent. They had unpieced a train, and this had galvanized them. They were anxious for more action. I don't know. I don't think women can unpieced a train. Immersion broken. Yeah, there's really not much left, and we're gonna finish part 6 tonight. Which was helpfully pointed out by one of our top book club board members, Purple Wayne. They had unpieced a train, and this had galvanized them, and they were anxious for more action. Maya had to use a hand megaphone, and all the time that she stood on a chair and talked, the crowd swirled around them, and participants in several loud arguments ignored her, as if she were a cocktail lounge pianist. I don't even remember the beginning of this book. Frank had John, the first man on Mars, Frank being the second, much to his chagrin. Frank had John assassinated, and then he started a race war riot. And participants in several loud arguments ignored her, as if she were a cocktail lounge pianist. Frank's Russian was rusty, and he couldn't understand most of what the crowd shouted at Maya. But he followed her replies pretty well. She was explaining the emigration moratorium, the bottleneck in town robot production, and in water supplies, the necessity for discipline, the promise of a better life to come for all, if all was enacted in an orderly fashion. No, he used a race riot to have John murdered and murder the murderer. Well, tomato, like, this guy doesn't even remember the first part. I'm just summarizing. I'm paraphrasing, okay? Technically, yes, but I think doesn't matter. I think same difference, you know? Different sameness. This way or that way. Loves Red Mars but hates Elon Musk. Yes, because Elon Musk owns Mars, and that was obvious. Get your taint off of my planet. He murdered the murderer first, though. Yeah, technically, also true. See, it's just confusing if you add too many details. Like, I'm just trying to describe the points. Terraform Mars as long as it stays in the pages of a sci-fi novel. There was nothing, you give me nightmares. Okay? Go away. Okay. His brain fascinates me. Should be studied in a jar. Like cheering for the team in fantasy football, but booing when they win in real life. I have to stop reading your messages. Yes, actually, the cognitive dissonance is quite uncomfortable for me. Everybody point and laugh. Ha ha, she hoped for a better future. Not run by a pasty man-baby in diapers. How quaint. Frank's Russian was rusty, and he couldn't understand most of what the crowd shouted at Maya, but he followed her replies pretty well. She was explaining the emigration moratorium, the bottleneck in town robot production, and in water supplies, the necessity for discipline, the promise of a better life to come if all was enacted in an orderly fashion. Also, I know you're getting off on how upset I am, but I just also want to say there is no Elon Musk in this book. He is not even an equivalent, even to like the worst characters. He's just so much more bland and fucking disgusting than anybody in this book. It actually would make an interesting sci-fi novel all on its own. Okay, and I'm done. Anyways, I can't wait for the Doge Express to take me to Mars, like our fearless leader promises. Daddy's home. The promise of a better life to come if all was enacted in an orderly fashion. He supposed it was a classic babushka harangue, and it had the effect of pacifying them somewhat, as there was a strong reactionary streak in many Russians now. They remembered what social unrest really meant, and were justifiably afraid of it. And there was a lot to promise. It all seemed plausible. Big world, few people, lots of material resources, some good robot designs, computer programs, gene templates. In one really loud moment of the discussion, he said to her in English, "Remember the stick." "What?" she snapped. "The stick. Threaten them. Carrot and stick." She nodded. Into the megaphone again. The never to be taken for granted fact of the poisonous air. The deadly cold. They were alive only because of the tents and the input of electricity and water. Vulnerable in ways they hadn't really fully thought out. in ways that didn't exist back home. She was quick. She always had been. Back to the promises. Back and forth. Stick and carrot. A jerk on the leash. Some niblets. Eventually, the Russians, too, were pacified. Excuse me, I have to burp. All right, wait. Okay. Afterward, on the train up to Sheffield, Maya gabbled. Afterward, on the train up to Sheffield, Maya gabbled with nervous relief. Face flushed, eyes brilliant. Hand clutching his arm as she threw her head back abruptly and laughed. Sorry, I'm gassy. Oh my. Face flushed, eyes brilliant, hand clutching his arm as she threw her head back abruptly and laughed. That nervous intelligence. That arresting physical presence. He must have been exhausted himself, or more shaken than he had realized by the time in the tents. Or maybe it was the encounter with Phyllis. Okay, that was a good one. Or more shaken than he had realized by the time in the tents. Or maybe it was his encounter with Phyllis. Because he felt himself warming to her. It was like stepping into a sauna after a freezing day outside, with that same sense of relief from vigilance, of penetrating ease. I don't know what I would have done without you, she was saying rapidly. Really, you are so good in these situations, so clear and firm and sharp. They believe you because you don't try to flatter them or soften the truth. That's what works best, he said, looking out the window at the tents running by. Especially when you're flattering them and lying to them. Oh, Frank. It's true. You're good at it yourself. This was an example of the trope under discussion, but Maya didn't see it. There was a name for that in rhetoric, but he couldn't recall it. Metonymy? Synodosh? Synecdoche? But she only laughed and squeezed his shoulder, leaning against him. As if the fight in Burroughs had never happened, not to mention everything before that. And in Sheffield, she ignored her stop and got off the train with him at his stop, walking at his shoulder through the spaciousness of the Rim station, and then to his rooms, where she stripped and showered and put on one of his jumpers, chattering all the while about the day and the situation at large, as if they did this all the time. Went out to dinner, soup, trout, salad, a bottle of wine, every night, sure. Leaning back in their chairs, drinking coffee and brandy. Politicians after a day of politics. The leaders. She had finally wound down and was poured into her chair, content just to watch him. And for a wonder, it didn't make him nervous. It was as if some force field protected him from all that. Perhaps the look in her eye. Sometimes, it seemed you really could tell when someone liked you. Frank's like 100 years old. He's just realizing that for the first time. Still, you can't trust a bitch. He's slipping. He's slipping, bros. He's slipping. She spent the night. And after that, she divided her time between her quarters at the Mars First office and his rooms, without ever discussing what she was doing, or what it meant. Synecdoche? Without ever discussing what she was doing, or what it meant. And when it was time for bed, she would take off her clothes and roll in next to him, and then onto him, warm and calm. The touch of a whole body at once. The touch of a whole body all at once. And if he ever started things, she was quick to respond. So quick to respond. He only had to touch her arms. He only had to touch her arm. Like stepping into a sauna. She was so easy these days. So calm. Like a different person. It was amazing. Not Maya at all. But there she was. Whispering, Frank, Frank. But they never talked about any of that. It was always the situation, the day's news. And in truth, that gave them a lot to talk about. The unrest on Pavonis had gone into abeyance temporarily, but the troubles were planet-wide and getting worse. Sabotages, strikes, riots, fights, skirmishes, murder. And the news from Earth had plummeted through even the blackest of gallows humor into just plain awfulness. Mars was the picture of order in comparison. A little local eddy spun away from the vortex of a giant maelstrom, which looked to Frank like a death spiral for everything that fell into it. Little wars like match heads were flaring everywhere. India and Pakistan had used nuclear weapons in Kashmir. Africa was dying. And the North bickered over who should help first. One day they got word that the Mohole town, Hephaestus, west of Elysium, manned by Americans and Russians, had been entirely deserted. Radio contact had stopped, and when people went down from Elysium to look, they found the whole town empty. I don't know, who wouldn't want to go to Mars? Come on.